Do big builds seem intimidating? I thought so too, until I found two builders that completely set me up with lessons from their amazing huge builds. Those builders are Gecko and Zanzibar. If you've been living under a housing rock, you might not know Gecko, but his Kowloon walled city and his Pandaren house show that he is the right person to come to. And Zanzibar is a queen of kit bashing, giving us custom kitchens, appliances, and more. She's taken her building to a whole new level with 3 massive Shrek-inspired builds. I learned so much from them, so let's find out what helped them really nail these big builds. The first tip that they shared is to find your focal point. Big builds can get overwhelming fast, but having one clear anchor gives your build direction and keeps everything feeling cohesive. For Gecko, the focal point was the center of his Kowloon build. Everything that makes the city starts here. The grittiness, the neon lights, the calligraphy, and the cramped spaces. It transports us right into the world he created, and it gave him a place to come back to whenever he needed guidance on the feel of the build. For Zanzibar, the focal point of her Shrek Swamp build was this hut. She imagined the outhouse as the actual entrance for the room, with the hut as the star. And everything reinforces that. The way the light hits it, the floating leaves and petals, and the entire atmosphere. There's so much magic in this room, and the hut is undeniably the heart of it. This tip actually completely changed my approach to my build. I wanted to create the Altar of Shatar, and originally planned to enter the room through the domed structure. But I wanted the dome to be the star. So I flipped the room layout 180, added a terrace, and it became the first thing that you see when you walk into the room. Throughout the building process, I kept returning to the entrance view. I'd build something up close, then run back down the stairs and check the look from the ground. Even after I'd carefully set out angles for the stairs or the tower, I'd always go back to make sure that the first impression, right when you walk in, was exactly what I wanted. The next tip is to mark out your proportions to get the build right. When Zanzibar built Castle Duloc, she used beams to measure where each structure would go, basically creating a blueprint inside the room so that she knew that everything would fit. This is such an obvious but excellent idea. I run into this problem all the time. I'll get halfway through a build and suddenly realize a space is way too cramped because I didn't plan it properly at the start. So this time, I laid everything out first. I used rugs to mark the mosaics and the gardens, and beams to outline the fountain. And it totally worked. By the time I finished, every element had the space it needed, and nothing felt squeezed in or out of place. Which brings us to the next tip. Use reference images. I used to feel like reference images were almost like cheating, but both Gecko and Zanzibar showed me how using them makes your build come to life in a way that's almost not possible without them. Zanzibar built her swamp by studying shots from the movie over and over, and figuring out how each element fit together. All of the vignettes that fill out her build came from her references. Gecko's references came from real life. He visited the area that memorializes the Kowloon walled city and took photos of the shops and the alleyways and the signage. So many of the details in his build come directly from these photos, and it's a huge part of what makes his build so authentic. So I leaned heavily on references from my build too. I walked around the ground looking for key details and to understand how everything related to each other. To get the dome right, I marked out its shape and the smaller towers with beams. Then I lined up a screenshot from my build with one of the in-game structure and adjusted until the proportions matched. I love how well the final structure reflects the original, and I know this would not have been possible without paying close attention to the reference images. I'll definitely be doing this again. Especially with big builds, to get those proportions right, something else you'll probably need to add is perspective. It's going to help the space feel even bigger than it actually is. Both Gecko and Zanzibar use perspective brilliantly. Zanzibar's trick is joyfully simple. This bridge looks like it spans a gaping chasm, but it's an illusion. Each plank is just a little bit smaller than the one before it, and our brains interpret this as crossing a far distance, which also makes the tower seem bigger. Gecko's use of perspective shows up in his city view. He scaled down items to create the illusion of distant buildings. And because our brains know cities should be big, it adds depth to the view. For my build, I knew I had to use perspective. There was no way I was going to fit everything in without it. So I took Zanzibar's trick and used it on the stairs. Every 2 steps, I decreased the size by 1%. I also adjusted their height and width as I went upwards, which creates the sense of a long staircase rising to the upper grounds. Up top, I made sure the surroundings reinforced the perspective by checking that the scaling for the trees, chairs, lighting, and furniture matched the building. And when it works, you get a majestic tower that wouldn't be possible at full size. Another thing that really sells a big build is knowing when not to add detail. Gecko shared that when building at this scale, you don't need to build every single detail. If you give the viewer just enough information to understand what something is, their brain will fill in the rest. And you can see this all over his work. I use this lesson for the blue crystal accents throughout my build. They're a major part of the architecture, but because they need so much kit bashing, getting the angles right is a whole thing. So instead of outlining all of the crystals, I focused the detailed work on the tower, where the surfaces were flat, and let the natural facets of the crystals take care of things everywhere else. For each tower, I would start by trying to add the detail, but the build looked way better when I wasn't trying to force it. So I added a few stylized markings at the base, and then let the viewer's brain see the rest. As someone who likes detail, this balance was hard, but my trusty review spot helped a lot. I'd try a bit of line work, and run down to check the view. From there, I decide if it made the build look better or worse. If it didn't help, I tossed it and relied on the overall concept instead. When balancing detail, texture is also important. It's why Zanzibar's hut looks so perfectly Shreky. It's all about the textures. The grass, foliage, and bark she's used gives this whole built from sticks and mud vibe, and it instantly reads because they feel so natural together. I applied this lesson to the dome of my build. Large, curved surfaces are hard to come by in WoW housing right now, but the poured concrete look is essential to the Draenei style, so I tried many options before finally settling on the forge. It meant doing some hiding gymnastics, but nothing else even came close. To fully sell the sleek metal and stone Draenei look, the 2 Draenei wall hangings became my go-tos. And honestly, working with these limited decor options sometimes made the decisions easier. Instead of constantly scrolling through the catalog looking for options, I started by checking whether my defaults would work. If they didn't, then I'd go hunting for alternatives. So if you're going for a distinct look, it is worth it to spend the time or the budget to make it happen. Big builds can be challenging to fill, so I loved how Gecko went about doing this. How did he do it? He has a story for every space you find in his build. None of them feel generic because they're filled with items that belong to someone. Family, an adventurer, or even Gecko himself. The spaces feel lived in because they are lived in, at least in his imagination. I wanted to apply this tip so badly, but my decor budget had other plans. The lesson still holds though. If you're struggling to fill your space, think about who works there, or lives there, or visits, and tell their story. The last tip is one that I've talked about before, but it's impossible to ignore when looking at Gecko and Zanzibar's builds. Lighting makes the build. Imagine Gecko's build without the neon signs. Or what if there was no lighting in Zanzibar's builds? The mood would be just wrong. Lighting ended up playing a huge part in my build too. There are hidden lights everywhere. They make the blue crystals glow so vibrantly. They're tucked into trees to highlight the details of the dome, and they add depth and texture by being buried in the ground or hidden behind stairs. Most of these lights aren't even visible, but you feel them. They just add a bit of magic. Having taken in all of these lessons, I can truly say that big builds have become a bunch of fun. If they've inspired you, I'd love to hear about it and what you're going to build. Or share any of your tips. And that's it. Do the like and subscribe thing if you'd like. Thanks for visiting, and see you later.